HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Camino Way, Lessons in Leadership from a Walk Across Spain, by Victor Prince, read by Rudy Sanda. Introduction. Halfway along our journey to life's end, I found myself astray in a dark wood, since the right way was nowhere to be found. Opening line of Dante's Inferno. I pedaled one last time and coasted as long as I could. When I stopped, I was staring across the Danube River at the stunning Hungarian Parliament building. After a month, my bucket list bicycle trip across the heart of Europe was over. I felt exhausted. I felt closure. I also felt that something was missing. My childhood self had set two goals for my life: to be president and to see the world. The failure to see the overlap between the two belied my naivete. Somewhere between childhood in the Midwest and college in Washington, D.C., I realized I was never going to be president. I decided I would settle for one rung down the public service career ladder, running a federal agency. Even before graduating from college, I got a great government job and had a precocious start climbing the ladder. My colleagues even nicknamed me Doogie, after a popular television character at the time who was a teenage doctor. As I worked with the leaders of government, I realized that they often got to the top by having successful business careers first and turning to public service later. So I left government to go to business school and start a new career. My business career went well, but didn't fully inspire me. So after several years, I went back to public service. I became a cabinet member for the mayor of a large city, and then the chief operating officer, COO, of a federal government agency. I'd reached one rung below my college goal and realized that was as far as I wanted to go. Federal government had changed a lot since I set my goal, so I considered that career box checked. I was in my mid-40s. The feeling was both satisfying and disconcerting. What do you do after you check off your career goal before your career is over? I focused on my second teenage goal: to see the world. As a kid, my parents gave me a globe and a suitcase as Christmas gifts. Scientists would identify a wanderlust gene years later, but my parents must have diagnosed me early. By my mid-40s, I had lived in 10 cities and traveled across 4 continents. I never let relocation get in the way of career advancement, even if it stunted my life outside of my career. Along the way, I got addicted to long-distance biking trails as the best way to experience travel. I loved the idea of traveling with a goal. Get from one village to another, go across a state, go across a country. I biked many trails, from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C., from Montreal to Quebec City, across New York State on the Erie Canal. I did a lot of long trails, but only ones that met 3 criteria. They sounded impressive to complete, they didn't require camping, and they fit into a normal vacation time for work. Now that I was taking a career sabbatical, I could do a trail that took longer than a week. The Danube River bike trail scored perfectly against my criteria. Covering about 50 miles per day on a bike, I would see a lot of Europe. It had places to stay and eat all along the way. And because it followed a river, it was flat. It was perfect. But as I admired the unexpected beauty of Budapest, I felt more empty than fulfilled. My month of biking had been the loneliest month I'd ever spent. Every night was in a different village or city. It's not easy to have conversations with people as you speed by on a bike. Biking is a great way to see the sights, but it's not a good way to meet people. I'd wanted solitude as part of my sabbatical. Over my career, I'd led progressively larger teams. The COO job I just left had me leading a team of hundreds of people. I loved leading teams and developing people, but after 2 decades, my batteries needed some alone time to recharge. I started looking for another trail as soon as I got home from Budapest. I decided to hike instead of bike this time, to get a more social experience. I was surprised at how few trails there are in the world that you can hike for 30 days without camping. The one trail that kept topping the list was the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage trail across Spain. For more than 1,000 years, pilgrims, peregrinos in Spanish, walked hundreds of miles to reach the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, Spain, to see the shrine built for the remains of St. James. The Camino was great for a results-driven Type A personality like me. Every night, I had to punch a stamp to show that I had succeeded that day. If I got enough stamps, I got a certificate at the end. How had I not already done this trail? It was perfect. The Camino was the clear choice from my list, but the religious roots of the trail gave me pause. My research, though, told me the Camino was as religious or non-religious as hikers made it. I pieced together an itinerary, packed everything I would need for a month in my backpack, and flew to Spain. The next 30 days on the Camino ended up being the best adventure I'd ever embarked on. More important than the beautiful scenery, history, and great company I had expected was how my eyes were opened. I found insight and inspiration, but not just on the finding myself front like many peregrinos. Many of the insights were about the thing I do when I am not on vacation, leading people at work. I've learned a lot about leadership in my career. By earning a Master in Business Administration, MBA, at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, I learned about the theory and history of leadership at work. As a consultant, I've been able to work with leaders in a wide variety of industries and countries. As an executive, I've led people across a wide set of functions, including human capital, finance, facilities, purchasing, project management, information technology, and customer contact centers. And, like most everyone, I've had a lot of bosses to learn from as well. The Camino provided a new, unexpected laboratory for me to learn about leadership. Every day presented new challenges that I had to manage through. I met dozens of hikers from around the world and got to learn about their careers. The Camino also provided time for inner reflection. The many social moments with other hikers were separated by long stretches of alone time. I found myself recalling interactions and decisions I had made over my last several years of work, and my mind focused on what I wished I could redo. I started to imagine how I would have done things differently if I'd had the benefit of the Camino lessons I was now learning. After I got home, I started writing about those insights and shared them on my blog about strategy and leadership. Each blog entry described how different experiences on the Camino taught me new leadership lessons, or reinforced old ones in new ways. Those blogs went viral. They hit a wellspring with thousands of people from around the world who have done, or aspire to do, adventures like the Camino. They also resonated with people looking for new ways to learn about traditional management disciplines. Many readers encouraged me to write a book. Their support convinced me that there would be an audience. The confidence boost I got by completing my Camino convinced me that I could take on a new adventure, writing this book. Part 1. Meeting the Camino. Chapter 1. The History of the Camino de Santiago. In the first half of the 9th century, a Spanish bishop named Teodomiro decided to investigate reports of strange lights and sounds coming from a hill in the northwest of Spain. After climbing the hill, the bishop discovered a site with 3 tombs, and he declared one of them to be the remains of St. James, Santiago in Spanish, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. According to the Camino legend, Jesus tasked his disciples with going out to different parts of the world and spreading their new faith. James went to Spain. He later returned to Judea and was killed by the local authorities. His associates put his body, by itself, in a boat in the Mediterranean Sea. The boat drifted to the coast of the northwest corner of Spain, where it washed up on shore, covered in scallop shells. Locals found the boat and buried the remains on a nearby hill. That burial site was what the Bishop Teodomiro declared he had discovered about 800 years later. To celebrate, the king ordered a small church to be built on the site over the tomb. Word about the discovery spread, and people started to visit the shrine. In the year 950, an intrepid bishop named Godescalch from Le Puy, France, traveled 800 miles to see the shrine, to beg mercy and help from God and Santiago, becoming the first pilgrim to be recorded as visiting the site. To understand how the Camino de Santiago developed after that first pilgrim, it helps to understand how other pilgrimages cut a path through European history before the Camino. Even in the pre-Roman Empire times, the custom existed of visiting hallowed places to get spiritual help. Individuals from Europe probably started pilgrimages to Jerusalem and the Christian history sites, the Holy Land, as early as the 2nd or 3rd century. By the 4th century, pilgrimage to the Holy Land was probably an established concept, with the Bible as a guidebook. Once the concept of Christian pilgrimage became established, a new destination for pilgrims arose to compete by the 8th century: Rome. As the capital of the growing Catholic Church, Rome offered its own religious sites to see as a draw, in addition to Roman Empire ruins. The spread of the Catholic Church to northern Europe around that time likely created a natural flow of people to and from the Church's capital city. In addition to Rome's draw, it was also an easier destination than the Holy Land for European pilgrims. It was both closer and under Christian control. The network of old roads originally built to connect the Roman Empire territories back to Rome probably helped too. The rise of the pilgrimage to Rome helped popularize the concept of pilgrimage. Even if few people would ever do a pilgrimage themselves, more would know what pilgrimage was. References to pilgrims started appearing in historical documents. Rome and Tours, France, were mentioned as pilgrimage destinations, and people were reported believing pilgrimage was a way to forgive their sins. Pilgrims were recognized for their distinctive appearance with their clothing and equipment. The pilgrim brand had been born. In addition to pilgrims, Rome got some very unwelcome visitors in the year 846 in the form of a large Arab raiding party that sacked the city. This was the latest in a series of attacks from Arabs in the south that made the people of Rome feel uneasy. Rome must certainly have become a less attractive pilgrimage destination as a result. The discovery of Santiago's remains was declared sometime around, but before, the year 842. The king who ordered the building of the first church on the spot died in 842. The timing was fortuitous. Just as the concept of pilgrimage had become established, one of its biggest destinations, Rome, was becoming less attractive. In addition, that northern area of Spain had pushed back the Muslim invaders in the century before. Getting a stream of Christian visitors was also probably helpful in keeping the Muslims at bay. The century between the building of the first shrine to St. James's remains and the first recorded pilgrim to the site, that of Godescalch in the year 950, was an eventful time. It was the heart of the Viking Age in Europe. Gunpowder was used in battle for the first time in China, and the Mayan Empire was collapsing in the undiscovered Americas. In the northwest corner of Spain, religious and royal officials were working hard to promote their area as a new pilgrimage destination, The small church at the shrine was replaced by a bigger one in 899. King Ramiro I ordered people to pay a tribute to the church in Santiago. Ramiro's grandson, King Alfonso III, sent a letter in 906 to the clergy in Tours, a pilgrimage site itself, in response to their questions about this new shrine, demonstrating that word about the shrine was spreading. In the next 2 centuries, circa 950 to circa 1150, were eventful, with the Norman conquest of England, the first European crusade to retake Jerusalem, the founding of the first universities, Bologna and Oxford, and Leif Erikson's landing in modern-day Canada. In the northwest corner of Spain, more pilgrims were coming to see the shrine to Santiago, and the locals were building infrastructure to support them. As the local Christian kings in Spain pushed out the Moors, they left behind roads and castles built to support those military efforts. A new basilica, the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, was started in 1075, and new settlements emerged among the pilgrim roads, such as Puente de la Reina, founded in 1090. In addition to physical infrastructure, local church officials, particularly Bishop Don Diego Gelmírez, 1100 to 1139, were laying religious groundwork for a pilgrim superhighway. Gelmírez successfully lobbied Rome to get the right to grant indulgences and remissions of sins in those years in which the feast of St. James, July 25th, fell on a Sunday. Because indulgences were typically only granted in Rome, this made Santiago even more attractive as a pilgrimage destination. The final piece of Camino infrastructure that emerged in this time was an innovation: the travel guide. Around the year 1140, a compilation of documents about the miracles of St. James and the pilgrimage to his shrine emerged out of Santiago. It came to be known as the Codex Calixtinus, named after Pope Calixtus II, 1121 to 1124. A pope, Bishop Gelmírez, had successfully lobbied. Beyond the religious content, one part of the Codex centered on describing Santiago as a destination, the routes to get there, and logistical information on the way. It even made the earliest known reference to the souvenir trade in the Christian West. A lot happened in the 4 centuries between the emergence of the Codex Calixtus and the start of the Protestant Reformation, 1517. Christopher Columbus, Marco Polo, Johann Gutenberg, and William Braveheart Wallace all lived in this time. In the northwest corner of Spain, the combination of indulgences and the Codex Calixtus were turning Santiago de Compostela into a top pilgrimage destination. Pilgrims started appearing from England before the close of the 12th century. In the 15th century, interest in Santiago had spread further, with records of pilgrimage to Santiago starting to appear from individual travelers from Italy, France, England, Germany, Sweden, and Poland. Amazingly, this period of growth included 2 tragic stages in European history: the Black Death Plague, 1340s, and the 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453. The recorded reasons for pilgrimage are scarce, but the stories that did survive center on the need to get sins forgiven, voluntarily or involuntarily. After the murder of Thomas Becket in 1170, for example, English King Henry II promised to make a pilgrimage as penance for his role, and he asked the Pope to choose between Rome, Jerusalem, and Santiago as his destination. Some pilgrimages were not to ask forgiveness, but to ask for relief. Between 1456 and 1483, for example, 4 separate cities in Spain, Italy, and France sent representatives to Santiago to beg for help in lifting plagues from their cities. Some pilgrimages may have had less spiritual reasons. Some trips were probably as much for tourism as religion, like a German party of 1387 who admitted as much in their safe passage letter. And, as always, some pilgrimages may have had anything but spiritual reasons, such as running away from the law or from servitude. How many pilgrims were there during this peak age of the Camino de Santiago? There are no reliable statistics on pilgrims reaching Santiago, but a few points of data might give a sense of scale. A narrative from an Italian pilgrim in the 1600s mentioned that the Royal Hospice in Roncesvalles fed up to 30,000 pilgrims a year, a number that sounds more like hyperbole than statistics, but may help set an upper-bound sense of the scale of pilgrims at the time. A register of the Hospital de la Reina for the year 1594 logged 16,767 pilgrims, an average of about 45 per day, and on some days they had more than 200. Whatever the number of pilgrims during this golden age, it must have been only a fraction of the hundreds of thousands per year that are recorded now. For example, the estimated 3,600 pilgrims that came from England during the entire 14th century is less than the number that come from the United Kingdom in 1 year now, 5,417 in 2015. Any annual number of pilgrims in the thousands during the 12th through 15th centuries should still be considered impressive, given the challenges of travel and the much smaller total population of Europe. Pilgrimage on the Camino started to decline in the 16th century. Other methods than pilgrimage to get indulgences had emerged a century earlier. The Protestant Reformation further knocked down the reputation of indulgences. Part of the decline of pilgrimage on the Camino probably arose from its popularity as well. Records from the beginning of the period suggest that some poor people began using the system of pilgrim hospices not for pilgrimage, but more as the equivalent of modern homeless shelters. While the number of pilgrims was decreasing, the costs of supporting the hospices built for the larger crowds of pilgrims of previous centuries remained. Hospices were selling off land to meet their operating costs in the 18th century, and many closed or were destroyed in the Napoleonic Wars. The Camino was still alive enough in 1779 for future U.S. President John Adams to remark in his diary, during a trip across Spain to France along part of the route. Upon the supposition that this is the place of the sepulchre of St. James, there are great numbers of pilgrims who visit it every year, from France, Spain, Italy, and other parts of Europe, many of them on foot. Pilgrimage to Santiago never died out completely, but only about 70 pilgrims were thought to have traveled the route in 1979. Then an old trick seems to have started a rebirth. A new Camino travel guide. Elias Valiña San Pedro, a priest in a town along the Camino, published the final version of El Camino de Santiago, Guía del Pilgrim, in 1985. And it became a model for future guides. Just as with the emergence of the Codex Calixtinus 800 years before, once a guidebook hit the market, people started coming. Once pilgrims started coming, pilgrims started writing narratives, as they had hundreds of years before. Between 1985 and 1995, more than a dozen pilgrimage narratives were published in English. The Brazilian writer Paulo Coelho published his own book about the Camino in 1987, a year before his blockbuster book, The Alchemist, was published. In 2000, Shirley MacLaine, a famous American film actress, published her own Camino narrative, which became a New York Times bestseller. A German pilgrim's narrative in 2006 became a bestseller in Germany. The 2010 film about the Camino called The Way, starring Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez, seems to have been a key factor in increasing awareness of the Camino in the USA. Since that film came out, requests for an American Camino credential have quadrupled from about 1,600 in 2010 to about 6,400 in 2015. Pilgrims from other countries point to other recent books or films as their inspiration to walk the Camino. In short, the Camino de Santiago is officially back as it approaches its 1300th birthday. 11 centuries after that first recorded pilgrimage, in the year 2013, I was one of the 215,880 people from all over the world who were recorded as pilgrims to the same shrine. The small church had grown to be a great cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, a Spanish city of about 100,000 people that had grown around the shrine. My fellow pilgrims and I had walked roughly the same path the first pilgrims took, now known collectively in Spanish as El Camino de Santiago, the Path of Santiago. Chapter 2. The Spirit of the Camino. The Camino begins with one document and ends with another. Before starting their journey, pilgrims get a pilgrim's credential, informally known as a pilgrim or peregrino passport. I received my pilgrim passport from the non-profit group that supports peregrinos from the U.S., American Pilgrims on the Camino. That credential serves two practical purposes. It identifies travelers to the low-cost hostels along the way that are only open to pilgrims. That helps the hostels keep out non-pilgrims looking for cheap accommodations. The passport is also where a pilgrim collects stamps at each stop along the way to prove his/her journey. Each hostel has a unique stamp with its name, location, and sometimes a logo. By adding a date to their stamp, the hostels can enforce policies to move pilgrims on after a day or two to make room for new pilgrims. Upon arriving at the end of the trail in Santiago, pilgrims take their stamp-filled credential to get the other bookend on a Camino, the Compostela certificate. Written in Latin, the Compostela is the certificate to show that a pilgrim has walked at least the last 100 kilometers of the trail. An official in the Oficina del Peregrino, Office of Pilgrims, from the Santiago de Compostela Cathedral, reviews each pilgrim's passport and asks for the starting point and the reason for the journey. The official then writes the pilgrim's name and date completed in Latin and hands it to the pilgrim with the final, official, Buen Camino. I will always remember my trip to that office. It was part of a bittersweet day. I was elated that I had reached my goal, but sad that my journey was over. I could sense similar emotions from other pilgrims' faces in line. Some of those faces were familiar. Many were unfamiliar. All pilgrims from every Camino route into Santiago de Compostela converge at that office on the final day. When I finally got my Compostela certificate, my first thought was that I didn't know my first name had a Latin form, Victorum. My second thought was how to protect my priceless new document until it was on my wall at home. If my house were on fire and I could only rescue one document, I would choose my crumpled and messy credential over my Compostela certificate. The Compostela certificate reminds me that I succeeded in the challenge of walking across Spain. But my pilgrim passport reminds me of every step I took along the way to earn that certificate. The Camino is an example of the saying, "The journey is its own reward," and the passport is like a record of the journey. The process of getting a stamp as you check in for the night at the end of every day's walk is a ritual core to every peregrino's experience. Just as the sound of a gavel marks the close of many ceremonies, the thump of a stamp marks the close to each day on the Camino. For a results-driven executive like me, it was a form of immediate gratification on this adventure travel. Another day done. Thump. I remember getting my first stamp. I was excited, so I took a selfie picture. I bet most modern pilgrims do that too. I remember being overeager the rest of that first day hiking, getting a stamp at every rest or food break. As I admired my collection of stamps that night over dinner, I realized that I was going.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?